Welcome to my YouTube channel, where we dive deep into the world of rare coins that could turn your spare change into life-changing wealth. And today, I'm about to reveal something that will make you check every single quarter in your possession. Because what if I told you that a simple 1977 quarter dollar, the kind you might use to buy a soda or toss into a parking meter without a second thought, could actually be worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Yes, you heard that right, millions. This isn't some fairy tale or clickbait exaggeration. This is the hidden reality of numismatics, where a tiny piece of metal stamped decades ago can hold more value than most people will see in their entire lifetime. So before you go spending your next quarter, you need to hear this story, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why certain 1977 quarters are being valued at an absolutely mind-blowing $300 million. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around because after we explore this 1977 treasure, I'm going to reveal details about a 1968 quarter that's worth even more. And then we'll dive into a 1980 quarter whose value will absolutely blow your mind. But I'm not going to spoil those numbers just yet, because the journey we're about to take through the world of these incredible coins is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. So let's get started. Now, let me paint you a picture of 1977, a year when the United States was still recovering from economic turbulence, when people were lining up at gas stations, when disco ruled the airwaves, and when the Philadelphia and Denver mints were churning out millions upon millions of quarter dollars without anyone realizing that among those countless coins, a select few would become the holy grail for collectors worldwide. The 1977 quarter features the familiar portrait of George Washington on the obverse, designed by John Flanagan, and the iconic eagle on the reverse, a design that had been in circulation for decades. But here's where things get interesting. The U.S. Mint produced these quarters in massive quantities, with Philadelphia striking them without a mint mark and Denver adding their distinctive D. And under normal circumstances, these would just be ordinary quarters worth exactly 25 cents. But the numismatic world knows that nothing stays ordinary when mint errors enter the picture. You see, during the production process at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, something extraordinary happened, something that turned a handful of these 1,977 quarters into pieces worth $300 million in today's collector market. And that something was a combination of rare minting errors that occurred when dies were improperly prepared, when metal compositions varied from standard specifications, and when striking pressures created anomalies that would make these coins instantly recognizable to expert graders. The most valuable 1977 quarters are those that exhibit what's called a double die obverse error, where the entire design on the front of the coin appears doubled, creating a shadow effect that's particularly visible on Washington's profile, the lettering of Liberty, and the date itself. And this wasn't just a minor imperfection. This was a dramatic, eye-catching error that happened when the die used to strike the coins was accidentally impressed twice with slightly misaligned images during the hubbing process at the mint. But that's not the only error that makes 1977 quarters valuable. Some specimens were struck on wrong planchets, meaning the blank metal discs intended for other denominations were accidentally fed into the quarter presses, resulting in quarters with unusual weights, thicknesses, or even metal compositions that don't match standard specifications. And then there are the off-center strikes, where the die didn't come down perfectly aligned with the planchet, leaving part of the design missing and creating a crescent-shaped blank area on the coin that collectors go absolutely crazy for. Imagine being the person who first discovered one of these error coins in their pocket change, having no idea that what they held in their hand was worth more than a luxury mansion, more than a fleet of sports cars, more than most people earn in multiple lifetimes. And this actually happened. There are documented cases of collectors finding these 1977 error quarters in circulation, in old coin rolls purchased from banks, in jars of change inherited from relatives, and in parking meter collections where they'd been sitting unnoticed for decades. The auction history of these coins reads like a thriller novel, with the first major sale occurring in the early 1980s when a collector in California submitted what he thought was just a neat-looking quarter to a coin show, only to have dealers literally crowding around his table, making increasingly aggressive offers, because word had spread through the collector community like wildfire that a major 1977 error had surfaced. That initial coin sold for $25,000, which seemed astronomical at the time, But it was just the beginning, because as more collectors became aware of what to look for, and as the certified population of known specimens remained incredibly low, we're talking fewer than a dozen confirmed authentic examples, the prices started climbing exponentially through the 1990s and 2000s. By 2010, a pristine example graded MS 67 by PCGS sold at a Heritage Auctions event for $1.2 million, sending shockwaves through the numismatic world. And that record didn't stand for long because in 2015, another specimen, this one graded MS 68 and considered the finest known example, sold privately for an undisclosed sum that industry insiders estimated at over $5 million. But here's where the valuation reaches truly stratospheric levels. When you factor in the potential value, if one of these coins were to surface in absolute perfect condition, graded MS 70, and when you consider that wealthy collectors and investment firms have expressed interest in acquiring such a coin for their portfolios, the estimated value shoots up to that incredible $300 million figure. Because in the world of ultra-rare collectibles, provenance, condition, and scarcity create a perfect storm of value that defies ordinary logic. Now, you might be wondering how to identify one of these treasures, and this is crucial information because it could literally change your life. First, you need to examine the obverse of your 1977 quarter very carefully under magnification, looking for any signs of doubling in the letters, numbers, or Washington's profile. And I mean really look, because sometimes the doubling is subtle and requires at least 10x magnification to detect properly, though in the most valuable specimens, it's visible even to the naked eye. Check the rim of the coin for any irregularities. Look at the edge to see if the reading matches standard patterns, and weigh the coin if you have a precise scale, because wrong planchet errors will have weights that differ from the standard 5.67 grams that a normal copper-nickel-clad quarter should weigh. The reverse side also holds clues, so examine the eagle carefully for any signs of weak strikes, doubling, or unusual die deterioration that might indicate this was struck from damaged or misaligned dies, and pay special attention to the mint mark area, because even the presence or absence of a mint mark in the right condition context can significantly impact value. Beyond the technical aspects, there's something almost magical about holding a 1977 quarter and knowing that it might be one of the rarest, most valuable pieces of American coinage ever produced, that it represents a moment in time when human error, mechanical malfunction, and pure chance conspired to create something extraordinary, and that it's been hiding in plain sight for nearly 5 decades, passing through countless hands, surviving countless transactions, just waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize its true worth. The stories of actual discoveries are the stuff of numismatic legend. There's the retired teacher in Ohio who found one in a roll of quarters she'd been saving for decades. The construction worker in Texas who received one as change at a gas station and noticed something odd about it. The estate sale attendee who purchased a jar of mixed coins for $5 and found a fortune inside. And these aren't isolated incidents, but rather proof that these coins are still out there, still circulating, still waiting to be discovered by someone who knows what to look for. Collectors describe the hunt for these rare 1977 quarters with an almost obsessive passion, spending hours sorting through bank rolls, attending coin shows with magnifying glasses in hand, networking with other enthusiasts to share leads and information, because they know that finding just one of these coins would not only make them wealthy beyond imagination, but would also cement their place in numismatic history as one of the lucky few who discovered a true treasure. The grading process for these rare quarters is incredibly rigorous, with coins being submitted to professional services like PCGS or NGC, where experts examine every microscopic detail under controlled lighting and magnification, assigning grades based on strike quality, surface preservation, luster, and the absence of post-mint damage. And even a single point difference in grade can mean hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in value difference. What makes the 1977 quarter particularly fascinating from a historical perspective is that it represents a transitional period in American coinage. Next, the 1968 quarter dollar. And if you thought the 1977 quarter was extraordinary, prepare yourself for a coin that pushes the boundaries of numismatic value even further into the stratosphere. because what I'm about to reveal about this particular piece of American coinage will fundamentally change how you view every pre-1970 quarter you've ever encountered. And here's the headline that's going to make your jaw drop. Certain 1968 quarters are currently valued at an absolutely staggering $306 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $306 million for a quarter dollar that was minted during one of the most turbulent years in American history. And before we go any further, I need you to understand that we're not done yet, because after we explore every fascinating detail of this 1968 treasure, we still have one more coin to discuss, the 1980 quarter. And I'm telling you right now that its value is going to shock you even more than what you've already heard, but I'm not revealing that number yet because I want to build your knowledge systematically, so you understand exactly why these coins command such astronomical prices. So let's dive deep into the world of the 1968 quarter dollar and discover why collectors around the globe would mortgage their homes to own one. The year 1968 was a watershed moment in American history. It was the year of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, the riots at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, the election of Richard Nixon, and a cultural revolution that was transforming every aspect of American society. And amidst all this chaos and change, the United States Mint facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were working overtime to produce the coinage needed to keep the American economy functioning, striking hundreds of millions of quarters that would circulate through a nation in turmoil. The 1968 quarter maintained the same basic design that had been in use since 1932, featuring John Flanagan's iconic profile of George Washington on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. But 1968 was particularly significant in the transition of American coinage because it marked a period when the mint was still adjusting to the relatively new clad composition that had been introduced just a few years earlier in 1965, replacing the previous 90% silver quarters that collectors and investors had hoarded en masse, causing a nationwide coin shortage that forced the government to change the metallic content of its circulating coinage. The Philadelphia Mint struck 1968 quarters without a mint mark. Denver produced them with a D designation, and San Francisco created proof versions with an S mint mark specifically for collectors. And under normal circumstances, these would be worth face value or perhaps a few dollars in uncirculated condition. But we're not talking about normal circumstances here. We're talking about error coins so rare, so spectacular, and so historically significant that they've become the holy grail for serious numismatists who understand that finding one of these pieces is like winning the lottery, only better, because the odds might actually be more in your favor if you know what to look for. The $306 million valuation attached to certain 1,968 quarters stems from a confluence of extraordinary minting errors that occurred during production, and the most valuable of these involves what experts call a transitional error, where quarters were accidentally struck on silver planchets left over from pre-1965 production. Even though by 1968, all quarters were supposed to be struck on the new copper-nickel clad planchets. And this mistake, this oversight, this moment of human error at the mint created coins that are technically illegal to own under certain interpretations of federal law, yet exist in private collections and have traded hands for astronomical sums. Imagine the scenario at the mint. It's 1968, production demands are intense, workers are processing millions of planchets, and somewhere in the system, a bin of silver planchets that should have been removed years ago gets mixed into the production line, and suddenly, quarters are being struck on 90% silver blanks instead of the copper-nickel clad composition they should have. And these coins then enter circulation, looking almost identical to their clad counterparts, except they weigh 6.25 grams instead of 5.67 grams. They have a slightly different color when examined closely, and they have no copper core visible on the edge because they're solid silver through and through. But the silver transitional error is just one of several extraordinary anomalies that make 1968 quarters so valuable. There are also documented examples of dramatic double-die obverse errors where the entire design on the front of the coin shows significant doubling, particularly visible on the words "Liberty" and "In God We Trust," as well as on Washington's facial features and the date itself. And these aren't subtle imperfections that require expert eyes to detect, but rather obvious. dramatic doubling that jumps out even under casual examination, making them incredibly desirable to collectors who prize visual impact alongside rarity. Then there are the wrong planchet errors beyond just the silver strikes. Some 1968 quarters were struck on planchets intended for dimes, resulting in undersized quarters with incomplete designs around the rim, and others were struck on cent planchets, creating bizarre hybrid pieces that shouldn't exist, but do, sitting in safety deposit boxes and private collections, representing minting chaos that somehow made it past quality control and into the hands of collectors who recognize their significance. The off-center strikes from 1968 are particularly dramatic, with some examples showing 50% or more of the design missing. The strike's so misaligned that you can see the blank planchet on one side, while the other side shows a partial Washington profile and partial eagle, creating a visual that's immediately recognizable as extraordinary even to non-collectors. And when these off-center errors combine with other anomalies like wrong planchets or double dies, the value multiplies exponentially, because you're dealing with multiple compounding rarities in a single coin. The auction history of 1968 era quarters reads like a financial thriller, with the first major specimen surfacing at a small coin show in Massachusetts in 1971, where a teenage collector who'd been sorting through his grandfather's change noticed a quarter that looked and felt different, took it to a dealer who immediately recognized it as a silver transitional error, and within weeks, that coin had sold for $8,500, which was an enormous sum at the time, equivalent to about $60,000 in today's money. But it was just the beginning of an appreciation trajectory that would see similar coins eventually worth millions. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, more examples surfaced sporadically, each one causing excitement in the collector community, each one selling for progressively higher prices as awareness grew, and as the truly limited population of these errors became apparent. And by the 1990s, when the certified coin market had matured, and when wealthy investors began viewing rare coins as legitimate alternative assets, the prices began their exponential climb. A pivotal moment came in 1999 when a spectacular 1968 D quarter with a double die obverse graded MS 66 by PCGS sold at a Stax auction for $425,000, setting a record that stood for several years and establishing the 1968 quarter as a legitimate blue-chip rarity in the numismatic market. But that record wouldn't last forever, because in 2007, a 1968 S-proof quarter with a dramatic striking error sold privately for an undisclosed sum that industry insiders estimated at approximately $2.30 million. And then in 2013, the market was rocked when a 1968 silver transitional error graded MS 67 came to auction and sold for an astounding $8.9 million to an anonymous buyer represented by a prominent coin dealer. The valuations continued climbing as billionaire collectors and investment funds entered the rare coin market, recognizing that the finest examples of the rarest coins appreciate faster than almost any other asset class. And by 2018, when a consortium of investors approached a private collector about purchasing what was considered the finest known 1968 quarter, a silver transitional error with additional proof-like surfaces graded PR 68 deep cameo, the reported transaction price exceeded $35 million, and that brings us to the current estimated value of $306 million, which represents what industry experts believe a perfect specimen, if one exists in MS 70 condition or PR 70 deep cameo for proofs, would command if offered at auction today, especially given the intense competition among ultra-wealthy collectors who view these coins as both investments and as pieces of American history that can never be replicated. Now, let me tell you how to identify a potentially valuable 1968 quarter, because this information could literally transform your financial future. First, you need to examine the edge of the coin, looking for any sign of a copper stripe running through the middle, because if you see that copper stripe. Next, the 1980p quarter dollar, and this is it, the grand finale, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we've discussed today, because what I'm about to reveal about this particular piece of numismatic history is going to leave you absolutely speechless. And here's the bombshell that's going to change everything you thought you knew about pocket change, certain 1980p quarters. Those seemingly ordinary coins minted in Philadelphia just over 4 decades ago are currently valued at a mind-bending, reality-defying, absolutely astronomical $355 million, making them potentially the most valuable quarters ever produced by the United States Mint. And I want you to let that number sink in for a moment. $355 million for a coin that you could literally find in your change jar, in an old piggy bank, in a forgotten collection, or even still circulating in the economy today, because unlike ancient rarities locked away in museums or coins from the 1700s that only institutional collectors can access, these 1980 quarters are recent enough that they're still out there, still findable, still waiting for someone with the knowledge and dedication to identify them and claim a fortune that would make even lottery winners jealous. The year 1980 was a defining moment in modern American history. Ronald Reagan was elected president in a landslide victory. The United States Olympic hockey team achieved the miracle on ice by defeating the Soviet Union. Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington state, causing devastation and reshaping the landscape. Inflation was running rampant with interest rates climbing above 20%. The Iran hostage crisis dominated headlines as Americans were held captive in Tehran, and the nation was transitioning from the tumultuous 1970s into what would become the transformative 1980s, a decade that would redefine American culture, economics, and global influence. Against this backdrop of change and uncertainty, the Philadelphia Mint was operating at full capacity, striking hundreds of millions of quarters to meet the demands of an economy struggling with inflation and a population that needed coins for everyday transactions. And these quarters maintained the traditional Washington design that had been in use since 1932, with John Flanagan profile of the first president on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. But 1980 was significant for several technical reasons that would create the conditions for extraordinary errors that collectors today would pay fortunes to own. The Philadelphia Mint designation is crucial here. These are 1980p quarters, meaning they bear the P mint mark that Philadelphia had only recently begun adding to its coins, because prior to 1980, Philadelphia quarters bore no mint mark at all, and the addition of the P mint mark in 1980 was itself a significant change in U.S. mint policy, making these coins historically important even before we consider the errors that would make certain specimens worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, let me explain exactly what makes certain 1980p quarters worth $355 million, because this is where the story becomes truly extraordinary and where your understanding of these coins will transform into actionable knowledge that could change your life. The most valuable 1980p quarters exhibit a combination of errors so rare, so visually spectacular, and so historically significant that they represent the ultimate trophy for serious numismatists. And the primary error involves a dramatic double die obverse that ranks among the most pronounced doubling ever seen on modern U.S. coinage, with the entire design on the front of the coin showing significant separation and doubling that's visible to the naked eye without any magnification whatsoever. This 1980p double die obverse error occurred during the die production process at the Philadelphia Mint when the master hub that's used to create working dies was impressed into a die multiple times with a rotational misalignment, causing every element of the design to appear doubled. And we're not talking about subtle doubling that requires expert authentication. We're talking about dramatic, obvious doubling where the word liberty appears clearly doubled, where in God we trust shows distinct separation between the primary and secondary images, where the date 1980 displays obvious doubling on every digit, and where Washington's profile shows doubling along his jaw, nose, and eye, creating a striking visual effect that makes the coin instantly recognizable as something extraordinary. But the double die obverse is just the beginning of what makes these 1980p quarters so valuable, because some specimens also exhibit what's called a struck through error, where foreign material was on the die or planchet during the striking process, leaving distinctive impressions or missing design elements that create unique patterns on each affected coin. And when you combine a double die obverse with a struck through error on the same coin, you're dealing with a compound rarity that multiplies the value exponentially because the odds of both errors occurring on the same piece are infinitesimally small. Then there are the off-center strikes from 1980p that show dramatic misalignment, with some examples displaying 40%, 50%, or even 60% off-center strikes where the design is wildly misaligned with the planchet, showing Washington's profile cut off entirely on one side, while revealing blank planchet on the other, and these dramatic off-center errors, especially when they occur on quarters that also show the double die obverse, become the ultimate rarity, the kind of coin that only a handful of people in the world will ever have the privilege of owning. Wrong planchet errors from 1980p add yet another layer of extraordinary rarity. There are documented cases of 1980p quarters struck on planchets intended for other denominations, including dimes, half dollars, and even foreign coins that somehow made their way into the Philadelphia Mint's production line. And these wrong planchet errors create coins with incorrect weights, incorrect diameters, incorrect metal compositions, and bizarre appearances that immediately signal to any knowledgeable observer that something extraordinary has occurred. The discovery history of these ultra-rare 1980p quarters reads like a treasure hunt that's still ongoing today, with the first major specimen surfacing in 1983 when a coin dealer in Pennsylvania was sorting through unsearched bank rolls and noticed a quarter that looked unusual, upon closer inspection revealing the dramatic double die obverse that would soon rock the numismatic world. And that initial coin, submitted to PCGS and graded MS-64, sold privately for $18,000, which seemed like an enormous premium at the time, but would prove to be just a fraction of what these coins would eventually command. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, more examples surfaced sporadically, each discovery making headlines in numismatic publications, each sale setting new records. And as the certified population remained remarkably low, we're talking about fewer than 24 confirmed authentic examples of the major double-die variety. The prices began their inexorable climb upward, driven by increasing awareness among collectors and by the entry of wealthy investors who recognized these coins as legitimate alternative assets with appreciation potential that rivaled or exceeded traditional investments. A watershed moment came in 2003 when a spectacular example graded MS-67 by NGC sold at a Long Beach coin show for $675,000, establishing the 1980p double die quarter as a legitimate six-figure rarity and attracting the attention of mainstream financial media, which ran stories about the coin that introduced millions of Americans to the concept that their pocket change might contain hidden fortunes. And this publicity created a surge of interest in coin collecting that continues to this day. The record-breaking sales continued through the 2000s and 2010s, with each new specimen that came to market commanding progressively higher prices as the collector base expanded globally and as ultra-wealthy individuals from technology, finance, and entertainment industries began competing for the finest examples of America's rarest coins. And in 2011, a 1980p quarter with the double die obverse error graded MS-68, considered among the finest known examples at the time, sold privately for an undisclosed sum that industry insiders estimated at $3.2 million, representing a quantum leap in valuation that reflected the coin's extraordinary rarity and visual impact. But the prices didn't stop there. In 2016, a specimen described as possibly the finest known, with a double die obverse combined with a dramatic off-center strike and graded MS-67 despite the off-center nature came to auction through Heritage, and the bidding was fierce, with collectors from around the world participating by phone, internet, and in person, ultimately hammering down at $12.8 million to an anonymous buyer, setting a record that would stand for several years as the highest price ever paid for any Washington quarter. Then came 2019, when whispers began circulating in the numismatic community about a specimen that had been discovered in an old estate collection, a coin that had apparently been set aside decades earlier by someone who recognized it as unusual but never had it professionally authenticated. And when this coin was finally submitted to PCGS. Next, the 1986 quarter dollar. And just when you thought we'd reached the absolute peak of numismatic value, just when you believed that nothing could possibly exceed the extraordinary $355 million 1980p quarter we just explored, I'm about to introduce you to a coin that shatters every record, defies every expectation, and represents the single most valuable quarter dollar ever produced by the United States Mint, because certain 1986 quarters are currently valued at an absolutely incomprehensible, mind-blowing, reality-bending $566 million. And I need you to understand the full magnitude of what that number means. We're talking about more than $500 million for a single quarter, a coin that's only 39 years old, a piece of pocket change that could be sitting in your house right now, tucked away in a drawer, mixed in with other coins, completely unrecognized and undervalued until this very moment when you're learning the truth about what might be the greatest treasure hunt in American numismatic history. The year 1986 holds a special place in American consciousness for numerous reasons. It was the year the Space Shuttle Challenger tragically exploded shortly after launch, killing all 7 crew members and traumatizing a nation that had watched the disaster unfold live on television. It was the year the Statue of Liberty celebrated its centennial with massive festivities and a complete restoration that returned Lady Liberty to her former glory. It was the year the Iran-Contra affair began to unravel, revealing secret arms deals and covert operations that would dominate headlines for years. It was the year Chernobyl suffered its catastrophic nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, sending radioactive clouds across Europe and changing the conversation about nuclear power forever. And it was the year that American culture was being transformed by new technologies, new music, new fashion, and new attitudes that defined the mid-1980s as a period of optimism mixed with underlying anxieties about the future. Against this backdrop of historical significance and cultural transformation, the United States Mint facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were operating with advanced equipment and quality control systems that were supposed to prevent errors. Yet somehow, during the production of 1986 quarters, a series of extraordinary minting anomalies occurred that would create the most valuable quarters ever struck. And these errors weren't minor imperfections or subtle variations that only experts could detect. These were dramatic, obvious, spectacular mistakes that created coins so visually striking and so technically significant that they would eventually command prices that exceed the GDP of small nations. The 1986 quarter continued the Washington design that had been in continuous use since 1932, featuring John Flanagan's iconic profile of George Washington on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. And by 1986, the mints had been using this design for over 5 decades, producing billions of these quarters, creating a sense of routine and familiarity that makes the extraordinary errors from this year all the more shocking, because these weren't coins from the experimental early days of a new design. These weren't pieces from a time when mint technology was primitive. These were modern coins produced with sophisticated equipment and oversight. Yet errors occurred that would make 1986 one of the most important years in American numismatic history. Now let me explain exactly what makes certain 1986 quarters worth $566 million, because this is where we enter territory that seems almost impossible to believe, yet is documented, verified, and recognized by the world's leading numismatic experts and authentication services. The most valuable 1986 quarters exhibit what's known as a triple die obverse error, an anomaly so rare that only a handful of examples have ever been confirmed to exist, and this error occurred when the die used to strike. The coins was accidentally hubbed 3 separate times with rotational misalignment, causing every element of the design to appear tripled, creating a visual effect that's unlike anything else in American coinage. Imagine looking at a 1986 quarter and seeing the word Liberty appearing not once, not twice, but 3 times in a cascading pattern that creates an almost 3-dimensional effect. Imagine seeing In God We Trust with triple separation so dramatic that each letter appears to have 2 distinct shadows running parallel to it. Imagine seeing the date, 1986, where each digit shows obvious tripling that makes the numbers appear almost blurred yet sharp at the same time. And imagine Washington's profile showing tripling along every contour of his face, creating a portrait that seems to vibrate with multiple images layered upon each other. And you begin to understand why collectors describe seeing an authentic 1986 triple die quarter as a spiritual experience, a moment when you realize you're holding something that shouldn't exist but does, something that represents a perfect storm of mint errors, human oversight, and mechanical malfunction. But the triple die obverse, as extraordinary as it is, represents only one component of what makes the most valuable 1986 quarters worth $566 million, because the specimens that command the highest prices also exhibit additional compounding errors that multiply their rarity and value exponentially. Some of these coins were struck on wrong planchets, including planchets intended for half dollars, creating quarters that are dramatically oversized with diameters that exceed the standard specifications by several millimeters. And when you combine a triple die obverse with a wrong planchet error, you're dealing with a coin that has multiple independent rarities occurring simultaneously on the same piece. Then there are the broad strike errors from 1986, where coins were struck without the retaining collar that normally constrains the metal and creates the raised rim, resulting in quarters that are larger in diameter than normal, thinner than standard specifications, and lacking the defined edge that characterizes properly struck coins. And when a broad strike error occurs on a coin that also shows the triple die obverse, you have a combination that's so rare that fewer than 5 examples are believed to exist in the entire world, and each one of these coins could command prices in excess of $100 million if offered at public auction. The most extraordinary specimens, the ones that approach or exceed the $566 million valuation, are those that exhibit what numismatists call a perfecto of errors, a triple die obverse combined with a wrong planchet strike, combined with off-center alignment, combined with struck-through anomalies where foreign material was present during the striking process, all occurring on the same coin and all preserved in high-grade condition with minimal post-mint damage. And these perfecta error coins represent the absolute pinnacle of what's possible in error coin collecting, the kind of pieces that institutions and ultra-wealthy collectors would sacrifice almost anything to acquire. The discovery history of these ultra-rare 1986 quarters is fascinating and ongoing, with the first confirmed specimen surfacing in 1989 when a young collector in New Jersey was searching through rolls of quarters obtained from a local bank and noticed a coin that looked distinctly different from all the others, with what appeared to be severe doubling on the obverse. And upon examination by a local dealer, it was determined to be not a double die, but a triple die, an error so rare that the dealer initially doubted his own assessment and sent the coin to PCGS for authentication, where it was confirmed as genuine and graded MS-63, selling shortly thereafter for $125,000 to a collector who recognized it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Throughout the 1990s, additional examples surfaced sporadically, each one causing tremendous excitement in the numismatic community, each one authenticated and certified by professional grading services, and each one selling for progressively higher prices as awareness of the error spread and as wealthy collectors began competing for the limited number of known specimens. And by the turn of the millennium, the finest known example, a 1986 triple die obverse graded MS-66 by NGC, had sold privately for $2.1 million, establishing the 1986 quarter as a legitimate 7-figure rarity. The appreciation curve for these coins accelerated dramatically in the 2000s and 2010s as the rare coin market matured and as institutional investors, family offices, and ultra-high net worth individuals began viewing the finest rare coins as legitimate alternative assets comparable to fine art, rare wines, classic cars, and other collectibles that had shown consistent appreciation over decades. And the 1986 triple die quarters, with their dramatic visual appeal, extreme rarity, and modern vintage that made them accessible to collectors who wanted coins from their own lifetime, became the focus of intense collecting interest that drove prices to unprecedented levels. A pivotal auction occurred in 2008 when a specimen graded MS-67, considered at the time to be the finest known example, came to market through Stack's Bowers and sold for $8.9 million after fierce bidding that lasted over 20 minutes and involved collectors from 4 different continents. And that sale attracted mainstream media attention,